Good evening, everybody, and you're all very welcome if there's anybody out there. Um, you're all very welcome to the first of what I hope will be a series of interviews with some of the world's best known and most respected Albury's judges. The aim here is to get an insight into how they started, what they look for, and hopefully pick up some advice along the way. You can comment or ask questions as we go ahead, and I'll try to get through them as quickly as possible. Now, as this is my first attempt at this, just bear with me if there are any tech issues. So anyway, here goes. Our first victim, or sorry, should I say interviewee, needs no introduction. One of our most respected judges and a great ambassador for both our country and our sport. So I'm going to just bear with now. We see if we can pick up Anne. Good evening, Anne.
Yes, I can see you, Colin, and hear you.
Anne, you're upside down for some reason.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not looking at what I'm looking at.
You're very welcome, and thank you for doing this. How are things in lockdown in Cork?
Not too bad. It's brought out the community spirit. We're being well looked after by the neighbours and supplied with lots of lovely goodies. And we haven't run out of wine yet, so no great crisis.
Well, that's very important. So we're going to kick off with a few just background questions on your career. Starting with, when did you first start judging at national level, and what was your first international appointment?
Well, believe it or not, I first judged at your show, Dublin Dog Show Society, in 1968. And before I was saying, Jesus, she looks good for her age of 100. 16 at the time. And now it wasn't as it is nowadays. I didn't just start with one breed. I started with, I can't remember, but I'm sure about 10 breeds. But just to give you an example, there were 50 corgis there. And I remember talking to Michael McCarthy many years later, and he told me I gave him his first ever Green Star. And when he arrived at the show, he was totally horrified to find a child in the middle of the ring. And I also did the terrible that day. But one of my memories of that, funny enough, there was only one chow there. And I must have been made of fairly stern stuff then, because I actually withheld the Green Star from the chow. And the owner, and I was petrified of my life, he was going to attack me. And the other memory of that, those of us that are old enough to remember Maureen Hagen stewarded it for me. And I was judging Bostons. There were 31 Bostons there. And I kind of said, right, Green Star dog, pointed to the Green Star. And she said, oh, no, you can't do that. Mrs. Fottrell always wins. And I said, no, Green Star dog. Oh, no, Mrs. Fottrell always wins. And I said, well, not today, she's not. But isn't it funny, those funny memories you have when you first time judge appointment? I don't actually remember.
I can't believe it was Dublin Dog Show.
No.
As I say, I can't believe it was Dublin Dog Show.
Yeah, I know, and it was.
And you judged at the centenary then as well.
Wasn't it amazing? Absolutely amazing. So that made it ever so much special for me.
And your first international?
As in a foreign trip, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suspect it was a series of breed club shows between Australia and New Zealand, invited by the New South Wales Boxer Club. And then I did Boston show, Corgi show, it sort of travelled around. Again, the abiding memory of that was that the Boxer Club show had asked me to write critiques and to be fairly honest in my opinion of them. And there were probably over 100 boxers at the show then. And say 2 days, 3 days after the show, they had a meeting, and I stood up and read out my critique to a stunned silence. Then eventually somebody pipped up and said, well, we certainly know what you thought of them then. So advice to anybody is be a little bit careful when people ask you to give your honest opinion. It may not actually be what they required.
Australia, New Zealand, I mean, that was a baptism of fire. I mean, God, that's a long distance to travel in your first appointment.
No, absolutely. And it was away, I think, for about 3 weeks, because I did about 8 or 9 club shows. I think I did a Frenchie one, Boston's, Boxers, on both islands and a few other breeds. I did a Corgi Club show
Jeez.
too, and that was quite funny. A boxer guy took me to the show, and anybody that's judged in Australia will know you're a bit paranoid that you're a crook, unless proven otherwise. So you can't even go to the loo on your own. And as so often happens, by the time I started to judge the club show, I was well aware who was the president, who was the chairperson, who was the secretary. But unfortunately, not any of them won. And
Oops.
one successful lady, unfortunately, didn't remain for the barbecue after the show. So the only person who spoke to me for the entire night was the boxer guy who brought me there. So it was a baptism of various means. But I made lifelong friends out of it as well. But definitely a bit daunting, definitely.
Absolutely. And how long did it take you to achieve all breed status?
I became all breeds in 1984, which was 16 years later. But then remember, it was a different system.
Absolutely.
Pastoral working. I think would we have had 6 groups then? I think because pastoral
Yes.
working would have been basically the one group. And I think the criteria then was maybe if you judged 4 out of the 6 groups, something like that. You weren't, with all you were given, all breed status, you weren't actually technically all breeds at that time. But it was just the way the system worked then. But it's one of those things. I know a lot of people who sort of aspire to be an all breeds judge, but it can be a mixed blessing sometimes too, because
Absolutely.
you tend to be the judge that gets used for the, as I call them, the any variety nobody else is qualified to judge. I really
Absolutely.
have great sympathy for a lot of those minority breeds because they're permanently getting stuck with all rounders. But all you
But
can do is maybe do your best and try and learn as much about breeds before you do go to do them. But it is one of the drawbacks of being an all rounder.
yeah, absolutely it is. And I think we all fall foul of that one when we go judging abroad and get the rare breeds or the odds and sods, and probably rarely get to do our own breeds, which anymore when we're abroad.
Yeah, no,
But I think
we're used
people,
to.
I don't think people realize how difficult it is to achieve all breed status in this country now. There was a time up to probably about 10 years ago, you had to judge every breed within every group. And that was relaxed a little bit, and now we have to judge 85% of the breeds are recognised by the Irish Kennel. That takes a long time. And we don't do it overnight here.
We have had a lot of criticism in the past that every other judge was an all-rounder in Ireland, and I mean I've really defended that because a lot of the all-rounders that were around before the new system were getting on in years and weren't actually really judging very much. And
Yes,
I have kind of explained that now you couldn't. I mean, if everything fell in place and you got the right breeds every year, it would still take you, I think, about not far short of 30 years to become an all-round judge.
absolutely. That's how long and as you say, that's based on you getting your progressions every year,
Yeah,
without a gap. Um, so how many countries have you judged in now?
I think it's around 50. I did start to count them, but I kind of gave up. But it's around about 50. But I suppose the interesting thing is it's been in countries of so many different outlooks, cultures, way they organise dog shows. I mean, if you go to Scandinavia, they're so efficient and everything's so well run. The exhibitors are very polite, and they respect the judges. But sometimes I actually love the passion that you find if you go to somewhere like Italy. When they win, they are
Yes,
like they won the lotto. When they lose, it's like somebody shot their mother. And, I kind of think that passion is fantastic. Then sometimes you go, I was in Iceland very recently. I've been a couple of times, but last year I was in Iceland and I found it very refreshing how interested they are in your opinion, win, lose, or draw. And just the general enthusiasm they have for dog shows. But I think they only have 2 shows a year or something. But that's very refreshing. And then if you go to America, where it's all very professional, that's kind of another side of the show scene where all the dogs are so well presented and well handled. And I must say, I find the professional handlers exceedingly polite and very nice to each other and quite helpful to each
Yes.
other. So probably a lot less backbiting than there is in some of the other countries. And of course, Asia, that's the funniest of everything. I mean, I remember once being asked, I think it was Malaysia, and said, could I please have a coffee break because the Lhasa wasn't completely dried? And I kind of went, is that okay? Can you just stop judging waiting? Oh, yeah, that's fine, no problem, you know. So I think to experience all these different cultures, mentalities, it's just a wonderful experience, really is.
It is, and I think we're very lucky as all-rounders that we get to travel the world, and we don't see an awful lot unless you're on long haul of the countries we're actually staying in. But we do get a chance to meet people that share our passion and judge dogs from all over the world, and some better quality than others sometimes. But it is a great outlet for us.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And you know, there's nothing nicer than sitting down of an evening, having watched the groups and having a good chin wag. Did you think that should have been like that, or you know, whatever? Just chatting away. And also, you discovered that judges are actually interested in other things as well.
Indeed.
You know, from opera to running to whatever. But it's quite an interesting mix of people.
To politics. Many a political conversation has been had over the dinner table away abroad.
Absolutely, yeah. It's amazing the range of subjects that do get covered, actually, so it is.
Your favourite country to judge in?
Well, I mean, I can argue a case for different places. I think certainly my favourite show that I judged at was actually Santa Barbara. That was absolutely amazing in the States. The style of it, I mean, just to give you an example, my very good friend from Irish in America had come over, and Kay was with me, and we'd been discussing the night before were they okay coming to the show in jeans. So they were coming in at a leisurely hour after because I had to be in at 7:30, 7. So I arrived at the show to see all these ladies in their wonderful hats and wonderful outfits, just as if they were at Ascot races. So I very urgently messaged the two ladies back at the hotel and said, I think you better wear something better than jeans. But the whole style of it and the opportunity to judge dogs that you'd maybe watched on the telly when in the groups and best in show at Westminster, and the Breeders' Cup at the end of it, where they give this free competition to the braces and the breeders, and they lay on this wonderful, wonderful dinner for everybody free, not just judges, all the exhibitors, everybody that's there. So an experience.
So that leads us on to the next one. Would that be your favourite show to judge at?
Yeah, I think so. But it's not one of those that you would be repeated. You know, it's like for, you know, obviously you love judging the crops because the atmosphere there is fantastic as well. Midland Counties, of course, is another show I'm very fond of that I judge there fairly regularly. And again, it just seems to be a very feel-good show to judge at. And that helps to get tired. And so I think probably Crufts, Midland Counties, and Santa Barbara is a one-off. I mean, I'd love to be invited back, but I'm sure I won't. But
no, you never know.
Santa Barbara, yeah, very special, definitely. Yeah.
And obviously, probably like most all-rounders, you like to judge your own breeds when you get to go away. But outside of that, what's your favourite breed to judge?
I actually, which would probably surprise you, I quite like judging whippets. I think probably, you know, my parents had whippets, so I kind of grew up with them. And I like the fullness of the whippet and just the overall shape of them. I like their temperaments. And they also are a very high quality breed around the world.
Yes.
Basically, we have some wonderful ones. So I always enjoy judging them very much. Sometimes with the boxers being my own breed, because the types are so different around the world, that can be quite problematic. So you have to be fairly, when in Rome, do as the Romans as a judge, with the American type, the British type, the European type. Really, when you compare the Americans to the extreme European types, they're like two different breeds. So that can be
absolutely, but you do have to judge to what you've got.
My feeling entirely, at least with the poodles, that it's the same wherever you go in the world.
Yes.
The size is different.
So, if you were to choose, and this is a difficult question because I was asked this question recently myself, what's the best dog abroad you've ever judged?
Well, I've thought of that quite a bit, and in actual fact, I tried to find out what it was or the name of the dog, and I can't. I actually judged the most amazing bulldog when I was judging in Iowa. I think he was actually from Mexico, but he was just amazing personality-wise. He played, he jumped, and I think it was like a 5-show circuit. And I mean, the dog was at the end of the circuit as he was at the beginning. He was an amazing dog. I also fell totally in love with a Lhasa Apso, an Australian dog that Javi was showing. He's bred by Michael Kamek. I can actually give you his name, I think. I'm saying All About Me. And I gave him Best in Joe when I was judging in Slovenia, and he was just one of those dogs that brought the hairs up in the back of your neck. I thought he was just fantastic. And the other dog I think that was very special to me was the Akita that Best in Joe Windsor. And then I was, I don't know whether you'd say I was or she was in the fortunate position to have me as the judge 18 months later. When on the if I gave her the CC that day, she would break the breed record. And when I gave her the CC, which I have to say was probably not totally unexpected, having given her Best in Joe, the ringside brought the house down. It was unbelievable. And so wonderful to see the breed supporting a dog winning the breed record. And actually, I had to sort of get myself by the scruff and remind myself I still had the reserve bitch ticket to do. But it was just so emotional, wonderful. And I think that bitch, the charisma between her and her handler, and the sheer pleasure the bitch was taking in being the show dog, and she just a very, very special dog, very special dog.
Yeah, it is amazing when you find a dog like that.
And another dog, actually, I know you said one, but I'm a Pisces. I expect me just to make my mind up on one, Strangely, this year at Crufts, I was judging the import classes, and my best of breed in utility was a Zolo bitch. I thought she was beautiful. Now, never in my entire life would I have thought that I would think a hairless anything would be beautiful. But this bitch, when she came into the ring, she just glided around the ring. She had attitude. She just did everything. She'd nearly bring tears to your eyes just watching her. And you nearly would have moved with the pleasure of seeing how well she went. But as I say, an unusual breed. I wouldn't have thought that would have impressed me overly much, but it surely did.
So I've just had somebody pop in with a question. This is going to be a random question now. So asking, do you find a big variety in quality-wise in poodles around the world?
Well, yes, and some of the colours are very poor quality, unfortunately. I think some the Scandinavian countries usually have very good quality. Sometimes in France, unfortunately, with the mother country, and Germany, I mean, there are some good ones, but sometimes the overall quality is a bit heavier than I would like. But by and large, you go to America and there's some good ones. Australia, there's some good ones. Scandinavia.
Oh, there's some beautiful ones in Australia.
Yeah, so by and large, I'd say they're probably one of the most even, but definitely there are some European countries where they've kind of lost that gracefulness and refinement, maybe that we would like.
But I think
But
that's true of
generally,
most breeds. You do find quality varies from country to country.
absolutely. And I mean, it really sometimes it only needs a clever breeder in a country to keep the
Yes.
standard of breed up. And if the country doesn't have that, well, then dogs that maybe aren't that great actually win a lot because they
Hmm.
actually don't have significant opposition. I suppose that's what grading should be about, but it doesn't always work like that.
No. So just following on from my last question, is there a dog that you've never had a hand on that you would have loved to have judged?
Um, I could say I had a hand on her, but I never judged her, and that again was the Laza, Saxon Springs, Fresno. She was the best, absolutely wonderful. But because I knew Jeff and Angela, of course, I knew the bitch in private, but I never actually judged her. The other
Mm.
dog that I've never had I greatly admired was King Arthur, the Wire Fox Terrier. I thought he was absolutely stunning dog. He won the Terrier group at the World Show in Helsinki and in Milan, and then finally got Best in Show at Westminster last year when he probably wasn't, he was a little bit past his prime, but I thought he was the most stunning dog. I certainly would have been very pleased to have judged him at somewhere along the line.
It's interesting. Um, what's your most embarrassing or funny moment when you've been judging?
Well, I've had a few of those. To start with a rather funny one, I was actually judging in Belgium a few years ago, and I was doing Welsh Springers. I think there only were three or four, and they were good. So, well, that's what they got, very good, which included this champion bitch, which came from France apparently. So I'm starting the next breed, and in comes the guy and said, "Oh no, you can't give her very good. She won this and she won that, and she's champion in 4 countries, and this isn't right." And I said, "Look, I'm very sorry. It was my opinion today, and I'm not going to change it." So off he goes out to the ring again, and I'm carrying on judging, and in he comes with a picture of the pitch, which I presume must have been taken a few years earlier. And as I said to him, she was a bit like myself. Maybe 20 years ago, I could have competed in a beauty contest, but 20 years later, I still wasn't going to be a champion of anything. She had put a few pounds on in that year since the photograph had been taken, winning whatever she was winning. But he was so persistent about it, he really was. I don't think I've ever had anybody bringing a photograph in. I think one of my embarrassing moments actually was one of the first times judging, well, two embarrassing moments actually with poodles, believe it or not. The first time I was judging under the grading and FCI in Helsinki, um, I'd asked Carrie Arvin the night before, would I have to measure any of them? And he said, no problem, they'll all be measured. So, of course, as soon as I arrived in the ring, what happened? The whole queue be measured. Well, if you've ever used those European measures, but you use them now, trying to decide even which is the right way up to use them is not easy. Then, coupled with which, I actually didn't know the sizes in centimeters. So I actually went to somebody at the ringside and asked them, first of all, what size they should be and how to use the damn measure. So that was very embarrassing. The other occasion, again, with poodles was Cain in Finland, and I had a student judge, very tall fella, and we kind of going along, that's fine. I think he was writing his own critiques. And then at the end of, I think it was mediums, he said to me in the line, "And what do you think of that colour?" And I said, "Oh, it's a red. Have you not seen a red before?" So he drew himself up to his full height and said, "Red is not a recognised colour. And you give it CK. Thank goodness you didn't give it the CAC. So you want to crawl under a blade of grass." I tell you, it taught me a lesson always to make sure you know the standards of everything of the country you're judging in. You don't know.
Absolutely.
know it. No, that was acutely embarrassing. Thank God I didn't give it the breed or something. That would be cute. So we all have moments in our life.
Oh, we do. Oh, we do. Is there a show you haven't judged that you'd love to?
Westminster, I have to say,
Mm.
would love to judge a Westminster. I think the razzmatazz, the glitz,
Mm-hmm.
the atmosphere, just the whole thing is just so special. And I know, the entries are actually quite small, but then the dogs that are there are the top in the
Quality
country
is
in
superb. Mm.
breeds. I just love the whole glitzy razzmatazz thing over it. But as you know, it's very hard for a European to be
I'm
invited
surprised
to.
they haven't asked you yet. My God.
I don't think so, but anyway, you can always stream.
So, when you, as an all-rounder, what in your opinion is the most important quality when you're judging?
You mean as you look for in a dog, or as you look?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, as all-rounders, as we said earlier, we tend to get a lot of breeds that perhaps we're not so familiar with, or you to get breeds that are outside of your spectrum. So, how do you go about judging them?
Well, first of all, one of my own beliefs is don't try to judge like a specialist, because I've
Mm-hmm.
seen too many boxers, and they know the head is a bit special, and they try to judge to the heads, and then they make a total mess of it because they don't really understand the heads, and they end up putting up badly constructed dogs. So I think that's my own belief. I am an all-rounder. All right, I'm a specialist in some breeds, but don't try to think like a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, all-over dog. Um, Quality is, I think sometimes quality in a dog, even if you don't know the breed. I mean, sometimes you can look into the group ring and you have no idea in this world what breed it is, but you kind of know it's a good one. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it just shines out at you. I do think breed, with all I'm saying, don't judge as a breed specialist. I do think breed type is one of the most important things, because breed type is what defines the breed. Without that, it could be anything. And when you read a lot of, I think terriers would actually be a good example. When you read a lot of the terriers standards, there's very little difference in what you're reading. So
Yes.
it's the breed type that makes it a Lakeland, not a Welsh. Or those differences are very, very important. So I think um, an important aspect, never put up an untypical dog. And I
Mm.
think also soundness is very important as well. And funny enough, I was actually given a seminar in Argentina, so I had somebody helping me translate into Spanish the presentation. And this word soundness is actually a very English term, and there's no direct translation or meaning for the word in other languages. And yet it's a word dog people use an awful lot, a very
Yes.
sound dog, um, but usually means it's a good sound moving dog. It's not throwing its elbows out, or it's not close behind. And you can say sound in mind. So we use that word an awful lot. It's a kind of generalization, but generally it's quite a good thing to say it's a sound dog, or it's sound of temperament. So I think as a kind of an overall view, you are looking for a sound, well balanced dog. Um, but quality is that indefinable thing, isn't it? How do you
It
define
is.
quality? It's what was it? Somebody said it's like what was it? Comparing porcelain to clay or something like that. I
Mm.
can't remember exactly what. But that I think quality does shine out no matter what the breed is.
No, I think I agree with you. And somebody's just popped in here with there's a debate online of late about breed type and soundness, and they're just wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I think I saw some of that, because what
Mm.
was it? I can't remember, some very well known judge had kind of said soundness was more important. But I have to say I would have to go for breed type. I
Mm.
suppose being brought up with initially with a boxer, to where my mother said, if it didn't have a good head, it wasn't a boxer. It could be the mongrel on the street. So breed type would be absolutely ingrained.
I agree with you. And somebody else has just asked, do you believe breed specialists are as important as all-rounders?
Absolutely, because I think you need a specialist to keep the type, because you can see it sometimes with American dogs, because a lot of the American judges, well, they're not all-rounders, but they judge a lot of groups. But it just becomes the flashier, showier the dog, the better it wins.
Yes.
And then gradually, bit by bit, the actual breed type is lost. So I think a balance of both, because I think sometimes breed specialists can come a bit blind to the breed as well and miss important points. So I think a balance of both is very, very important. But for me now, breed type must look like you shouldn't have to find out what breed it is. You should screen breed type out.
I think it's probably an advantage that we have over some of our neighbours, where we get an influx of international judges, but also breed specialists. So we get a happy balance between the two. I think that's, from my point of view, that's important for any breed, that you do get that opinion of all-rounders, because sometimes they can see things. Breed specialist judges can sometimes get hung up on a specific point within a breed, and lose other areas.
Yeah.
So I think we're
yeah, and certainly in boxers, for instance, sometimes in England they go through cycles that they have beautiful heads and they look lovely stacked, but they can hardly put one front foot in. Their shoulders are coming out of their ears and the hindquarters out a yard behind them.
This is very true from as you know, my breed, American Cockers, where there is no self-respecting American Cocker handler that cannot get a good stack on an American Cocker. But when they move, it all falls apart.
Yeah, and I think quite often the breed specialist is more inclined to judge on the stack. Or, they do the usual up and down and maybe once round or something, but they don't have it as a high point in their judging, whereas I think all breeds judges, well, not even all breeds judges, but people that judge quite a few breeds,
yes,
I do tend to put a bit more importance on watching them in profile. And I do think profile movement teaches an awful, or shows you an awful lot, because as you say, a clever handler can make it any dog. But when you see it on move, then you can see if the shoulders are wrong, you can see if the back end's overangulated, if it's overreaching. It really does tell you the story. You see, I also subscribe that the smooth-coated dogs really, apart from checking both ends for teeth and the other required essentials, you can actually see most things moving without actually having to lay hands on them.
Absolutely.
You do it more expected, and if you didn't do it, you'd get killed by the exhibitors.
Yeah.
For smooth coats, that's not necessarily true with coated breeds. You have to get your hands on them and know where to put your hands to find out what's underneath the clever trimming. But no, I definitely balance, because otherwise I think you lose breed type.
So, other breeds do you reckon you have an eye for?
Well, I'm not sure if people would agree I have an eye for, but I actually enjoy judging gun dogs, believe it or not. I think I like the honesty of gun dog breeds. Getting back to what we were saying about breed type. Of course, you have to recognise what's important breed type, and the head's different and different proportions. But by and large, most of the gun dog breeds are well made, well angulated, relatively normal construction, generally have nice temperaments, are easy to work with as a judge. Probably an
they're very honest dogs.
Yeah, I
What you
just,
see is what you get.
yeah. I, if I say uncomplicated, I'm sure some of the people that shoot me for that, but I don't mean it in a disparaging way. I mean it in that they are very honest dogs. That
Mm.
the construction is very easy to see, and they're generally well made or expected to be well made. Um, there's intricacies, of course, that you have to understand, but I do actually enjoy judging them.
Mm. So, change subject slightly now. Do you enjoy critiquing, and do you find them valuable? And Alex Stewart has just asked a question: would you prefer to do verbal critiques rather than written?
Well, I think the critiques depend. I find when you're writing critiques in England and you're having to go home and write the critiques and write the names in and all that, it's a pain in the rear end to do, particularly if you've been judging a few breeds over a few days.
Mm.
Uh, I'm not quite sure whether it's a valuable thing in England, because if you actually wrote what you honestly
Yes,
thought, you
you're
have to.
critiquing the three best dogs.
I preferred the head on, and I would prefer a shorter back. Um, so you can't really turn around and say, well, it had round eyes and it had a thick skull. Um, I'm using that as probably a bit of an extreme. So but thanks to Andrew Brace, I found that doing the critiques easier now, because I actually use my iPad in the ring. So I
Yeah.
basically write critique in the ring. So I only have to put the names in, and then you can tweak it a bit, if you ended up
Mm.
giving it. Well, you remember those dogs anyway. The dogs you
Yes.
don't remember are the kind of also ran dogs that
Mm-hmm.
they're neither here nor there. For more meaningful critiques, which of course is what we write on the continent, I think again it depends what country you're in. I do definitely think they're greatly valued in Scandinavia, and they definitely read them there.
Oh, they
Uh,
do. The minute you write them these days.
well, nowadays they can sit at the ringside and download them onto the phone, so it's a bit scary in that
Yeah,
sense.
it is a bit.
And they do expect you. It's okay to say, it could have a finer skull, or it would look
Mm-hmm.
better. You don't have to gloss it all over. I think that's actually one of the things when I first started judging um, in Europe. Um, I found it difficult because I was always thinking of trying to find a nice way of putting it.
Mm.
Um, but then once I realized that you didn't want to be destructive, but once I realized that it was okay to say it was a bit wide in front or it was
Mm.
close behind, whatever you saw, that in actual fact, they wanted you to say some of the bad things as well as the good things. So I
Absolutely.
definitely think they are valuable. Now, sometimes particularly when you've maybe not arrived at the hotel to 10 o'clock on the Friday night, and you're judging Saturday and Sunday, or sometimes the 3-day shows, and you arrive at the ring and you think, oh God, I've got to do 80 critiques, and you feel tired before you start. But I actually find, after the first couple of dogs,
Yes,
you just click into it.
you do click into it.
Don't mind
I
doing
always
some,
find the phrase "would prefer" always very useful.
yeah, or could have a better,
Yeah.
this is putting it, and full size.
Mm.
If you think it's big, full size or up to size, things like that. I actually think it's a very good thing for us as judges, because if you go to countries like Japan or Australia, well, Japan is a very tight judging schedule. I think it's only about just 1.5 minutes a dog or something like that at their big
Mm.
shows. So you have to be very, very fast. So you end up, you're actually really judging on instinct. You're not actually thinking, well, why did I put that one up? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you can do a better job judging like that. But
Mm.
I sometimes think of it as, in show jumping terms, the puissance horse and the speed horse. That sometimes I would liken judging on the continent to the puissant horse, where you really have to think about what you're doing, as to the speed horse at the other shows, where you're just flying around as fast as you can get through them without
Yes.
any great. So I do think it's actually very good for us to do it as well.
I think it does concentrate the mind when you're judging as well. I think it makes you more conscious.
It does, and I generally would talk to the exhibitors, maybe in my best male and best bitch. I would maybe go down the line and say, look, there's very close between these two, but I just prefer, or whatever you just prefer. And I actually find, particularly again in Scandinavia, that they're very knowledgeable themselves, and quite often they said, "Oh, I know what you mean," or "I know it's not
Yes.
the time." But they know their own dogs very well, and I able to talk to the exhibitors that that you can actually do that. I do think if you're going to grade, and I mean we've seen that in Ireland, it's very difficult if judges give lower grades and don't explain why. And over the years, it's caused a bit of problems.
Yes.
Some judges are quite good if you go in. If an exhibitor goes in politely and says, would you mind telling me? Obviously, you don't get the sleeves rolled up and go in and say, why on earth did you give mine? But I do tend actually, even judging in Ireland, unless they're very big classes or something, I would actually tend to talk to the exhibitors that have given a lower grade. Just to tell them why, so they understand. And I remember a few years ago, a lady was showing a white toy poodle and on the circuit, and she got a lower grade at every show. And she asked me on the Saturday, could I explain to her why she got the lower grade? Well, I could easily have explained to her, but I didn't really feel that it was appropriate. So as it happened, it was Hans Vandenberg was the judge on the Saturday, and I thought no better man than Hans. So I just said to her, look, he's a very nice person. Just go up and say you're good, and would you mind explaining to her, why she wasn't doing it? And of course, Hans was fantastic at that because
As usual.
Absolutely. But I do think it does cause a lot of problems in countries. I find in Belgium also, when you don't write critiques, you could have somebody coming back to you when you finish judging, asking you why. So actually, if I'm in Belgium, if I've given a lower grade, I write a wee note on the judging book just to kind of remind myself, so that if they do come back and ask, I can say, okay, what's your number, and have a look it up to find out, why I didn't give it a higher grade.
And for people, because when you're critiquing for the first time when you're abroad, and I know I was, certainly when I did it for the first time, it can be quite daunting.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give to somebody who is just going off to do an appointment abroad where they were going to have to critique?
Well, I think, well, first of all, I think critiquing is one of those acquired skills that the more you do it, the easier it gets for you, because you learn to, first of all, you've got the time factor. All right, you've given more time on the continent than normally. But you have to learn to and I think that's why sometimes in Ireland you hear the being criticized because the judge quickly. The judge quickly because they're assessing very quickly because they got it right about them. I think what I do is usually while I'm just looking around for the first look, I kind of have an idea. Then I think it's important to try and start with the positive and finish with the positive. You can always find, if it's awful, you can say it's a color, or it's got a happy temperament, or you can find something.
Yes.
It's a nice size, or it walks on the lead, something. So
Yeah.
I usually say to people, do try to write a constructive critique. Also, I think it's important to write breed specific critiques, like, if you're doing boxers, say it's got a well padded muzzle, something like that, so that it relates to the breed you're judging. Also, it should relate to the dog you're looking at, not just regurgitate the breed standard. So I think that's important too. But it is important that you justify the grade that you
Mm.
give. There's no point giving it a wonderful critique and then giving it a very good at the end of it.
Absolutely, yes.
So you do need to also put in the relevant faults or things that you'd prefer something better. I think the other thing is, particularly if you've been judging in England where you write comparative critiques, that's slightly different as well, because you're writing a critique just on the dog in front of you, not that it was better than the other dog in head or whatever it was. So I think that takes a wee bit of getting used to. But I think the main thing is, I was judging in Italy a few years ago, and my ring steward had stewarded for me in Italy a few times before, and he was telling me he stewarded for an American judge who wrote, "There is nothing about this dog I like." Well, I don't advise anybody writing that. Equally well, I don't think it's a great critique to write something like, "Oh, well presented, stylish dog, well worthy of being a champion." You know, what does that tell you?
Yes.
So try to write meaningful critiques, but be constructive. It really doesn't do anybody any good to be writing horrible head too long and back. I mean, I've seen, because nowadays people post these critiques on Facebook, or
Yes.
if you're at the line, you can go and read them yourself. But equally, well, it doesn't do any good to say every dog in the class is absolutely beautiful. So you have to find a middle road. And it is important that you do write about the dog in front of you, not saying, "Oh, right, it said in the breed standard it should have almond eyes, so I'll just say it has almond eyes, whether it does or whether it doesn't." You know?
Without writing essays, though, because I think people do sometimes fall into the trap of writing critiques that are maybe too long.
Yeah.
You know, they should be to the point. As you say, mentioning the pertinent points and any things that you would prefer.
Yeah, I think so too, and I also think, funny, years ago I was actually with Angela. She was judging the Poodle Club show, and I was sitting at the ringside, and whoever was beside was translating a lot of the critiques. And we have an expression in poodles, a bit heavy in back skull. What we actually mean is heavy in cheeks, but we understand what we mean. But when the lady was translating it, they were all going, to the back of the head, heavy in back skull. What does she mean by that? So it's things like that we might have English expressions that we understand.
Yes.
But they don't translate.
They don't translate.
So I find I would say don't make it too complicated, because people where English is not their first language. So
I know.
Keep it simple language.
Yeah, Rita got a great piece of advice from the late Joe Delmar when she asked about critique, and his simple answer was, "Say what you see."
Yeah, I think that's very good advice, actually.
And it is true. So, what was the best piece of advice you were giving when you started judging?
Well, my mother, of course, with the boxer, it isn't a boxer if it hasn't got a good head. That stayed with me through life, and I have to say, is that a bit with the poodles as well. And generally speaking, on breeds, I do like a decent head. I think the other, and I don't even remember who said it to me, but they said, your first impression is quite often the best impression. Don't overthink it. And I think that is actually very good advice, because sometimes you can actually talk yourself out of making the right decision. They come in the ring and you send them around and you think, "Oh, that's really nice." And then you go over it and maybe there's some maybe silly thing, nothing that you don't like about it. And then the more you think about it and you think, "Oh, I don't know about that other dog has a better," and in the end you actually make the wrong decision because you've actually just been too much thought into it. And I think the other thing is, what's the other expression? They don't get any better the longer you're.
Absolutely.
So I think that's kind of another good point too. Don't spend
Absolutely, and that is so true. I mean, when they first come in and they go around, or whatever way you want to judge them, but mostly I would take them round first.
yeah,
You do something, if it's that glamorous, it will catch your eye.
yeah.
I had that experience in Australia recently with that white standard poodle who walked in, and I
Oh,
thought, if this is as good as it looks, and absolutely when you put your hands on it, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. And
of course,
go with your gut.
sometimes with coated breeds you can have a few shocks, but
Yeah, particularly presentation breeds.
I mean, no longer ago than last night, I was watching Dan Erickson's interview with Dante, and I've heard it said before, but I think it's such a good thing to remember. To their virtues be ever kind, to their faults a little blind. And I think that's very, very good advice. Reward virtue rather than penalize too much in faults. And I think that's where quite often you can go wrong because you concentrate on something that you don't like rather than 95% of the dog you do like. Um, so I think those probably would be the two main things. Actually, one of the other things that stuck in my mind, I don't know whether you'd call it advice or not, but it actually harks back to being an all-rounder. Years ago, when Michael McCarthy, Monica was very ill, he had to cancel a couple of judging appointments fairly close to the time. Harry O'Donoghue rang me up to see would I go to Canada for him, and I said to Harry, "Oh yeah, I can go. Okay, but what breeds am I doing? You know?" And he said, "Oh, just the usual few terriers. You know what Harry's like, you know." So that was fine. I agreed to go, got the ticket and all the rest, and then the list of breeds came in, and there were things like, I mean, I'd be familiar with them now, but this is, I'm talking a long time ago, you know, coonhounds and Eskimo dogs. I rang Harry up. I said, I don't even know what these breeds look like, let alone how to judge them. And he said to me, "Listen, dear, are you an all breeds judge or are you not? If you're an all breeds judge, then you can just get on with it and judge them." And it was kind of words that stuck in my brain forever.
Yeah,
That you know, you can't decide one day that you are an all-rounder and the next day that you're
absolutely.
not. You just have to get
I just
on with what's thrown at you.
going back to presentation breed. Somebody has just popped in with a question: is how much product? Now you're a poodle person out here, so be careful. How much product do you, or do you take it into consideration?
Well, sometimes actually I've been judging in countries where an exhibitor will come over and ask the steward to
Hmm.
ask me, do I object to lacquer? I think I have a very good answer for that, which I actually don't, to be honest. Now I don't, as long as it's not overdone. But what I say to them, I said I am absolutely happy with whatever's permitted in the country. So I just leave it at that and leave it up to themselves.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good answer, actually.
Well, it means you're not landing yourself in it too if they ended up getting involved.
Yes.
I mean, undoubtedly, there are countries that all sorts of any lacquer, colouring, whatever, are banned and it's enforced. So it's a fair playing field.
Hmm.
Um, I tend to think, really, what harm did a bit of lacquer do in a poodle top knot, or a bit of
Yeah.
chalk on a buck? So I'm not going to throw them out for it. I don't like it when it's overdone. I don't like poodles when it's like candy floss down their backs
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
down and all that. But to keep the top knot up a bit,
Now it
or
doesn't bother me because I'm going to get my hands stuck in there anyway. So whatever they've done is going to get upset.
yeah, and I don't know whether you saw any of the videos that when I did one for Andrew Brace's interview there, but I'll tell the story as it's relevant to what you're saying. We were judging in Brazil, 3 shows on the same day, so the 3 rings next door to each other. There was myself, Andrew, and an Argentinian judge. So the Shih Tzus were done up a la American, you know, with the scaffolding, top nuts lacquered up.
Yes.
I quite like. So I judged them first. They had to go past Andrew's ring to go to the Argentinian judge. And as they walked past the ring, Andrew said to them, "You better get all that muck out of their top nuts before you bring them on." So they had 2 judges that didn't mind at all. And very fortunately for them, the Argentinian judge and I put up the same dog. So it was able to go into the groups with the top knot up, and Andrew put the bitch up, so it had its head all out. But it was funny to see the exhibitors ringside madly trying to get the stuff out of the top knots. But no, I
Uh,
can't. Within reason. And I mean, I think
yes.
if you're judging in countries where they do it, go to America and tell them they can't use top knots and they can't use false, trying to think what they call the false hair pieces to put in. I think you lost your brains.
Yeah.
So I think common sense
I
applies.
think it goes back to your earlier comment, when in Rome.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm not somebody to
So,
be kind of don't tell them all to show them your way.
so what advice, somebody who's going away for their first international appointment, what advice would you give them?
Um, well, I think first of all would be to actually make sure you know the system of the country you're going to,
Mm-hmm.
because even in FCI systems, and this is something I find difficult to understand, that at national shows, not all countries have the same system. I mean, if you take for Ireland, our puppies at national shows compete for the Green Star. Any class can win the Green Star.
Yes.
Go to Italy in the junior and compete at the end for best of breed, but they can't compete for anything else. So different countries do have different rules, and you would like to think that your steward would know the rules, but sometimes they don't speak your language very
Mm-hmm.
well, or so if at all. I mean, a lot of shows send you out the info first of all, but some don't. So definitely you should try and keep yourself well informed before you go.
Mm.
Um,
And
don't
just touching on
don't
touching on various judging systems,
mhm.
CQs. Do you like them?
Yeah, I do. I think they're
I love
terrific
them.
because I think grading the grading system I find is very difficult if you get nondescript dogs and you're thinking you're going to give it a very good or bad. And you write the critique, and you haven't really said anything awfully negative
Yeah.
about it. No, the head's okay, it's reasonable made, it's reasonably sound. And you think, well, I can't really give it a lower grade, but do I want to give it a CASIP or a CAC? And I think CQ is so good for that
Yeah.
because you can reward that word quality again. So it just makes that difference between that nondescript dog with actually not too much wrong with it.
And
But
I think that it's particularly important in bitches because you can have a really nice bitch, but it's just ordinary. But she's going to produce something lovely.
yeah,
Um, and she may be worthy of an excellent, but she just hasn't got that champion quality.
yeah,
Um,
ex-
and I love it.
no,
I
I
wish
think
other countries. I think it should be adopted
I
anywhere.
yeah. And I mean, it means you can really make a difference because you can go through some classes. I mean, and actually, I'll give you a great example. I was doing border terriers a few years ago in Denmark, and the dogs were sensational, absolutely sensational. And I give out a load of CQs, and when I'm doing best dog, I'm talking to them, saying,
Mm,
these are wonderful, and there was only so much between these, and how wonderful they are. And the bitches came out, and I only gave out 2 CQs in the whole
yeah,
bitch entry. It meant too that the dog people could value the CQ as that bit extra as opposed to just being an excellent. And I think it means you can be a little bit more generous with the excellence, as you say in the case of dogs like that bitch that you maybe isn't quite the quality of giving it a CC, but
yeah.
is well worthy of being excellent.
Mm.
But I think the grading, I mean, an awful lot depends on what country you judge in. Um, in France and Italy, if you don't give them an excellent, it's like you stab them in the back. I mean, it's
Oh, absolutely,
in Latin
absolutely.
American countries, if you don't give them an
Yeah.
excellent, I mean, I was judging in Argentina, in Cordoba, And the secretary came to me and says, they say you're being very hard on the grades. And I said, what? You're kidding me? I said, if it walks on a lead and looks like the breed, I'm giving it an excellent. Yeah. And so it's very relative, how people regard grades. I think, again, in Scandinavia, it suits them. And if you don't use the grades, they really don't respect you.
No, they don't.
They're interested.
So, random question here now. If you were a judge
just
yeah,
before you go on to that, just one other bit of advice I would give to somebody starting off and going abroad. Sorry to cut in on you, but I actually think it taught me an awful lot. Is, well, first, very basic, don't sit in the bar half the night before you're judging the next day. It doesn't help you bending over dogs.
very true.
But no, when it comes to group time, try and sit near to somebody that's very experienced, or somebody that you respect, that you can listen to what they're saying about dogs and ask questions about. And I mean, I have to say, Hans Lettinen was a wonderful, wonderful mentor to me. When I first met him, actually, I was in Australia very early on. I was terrified of him because he was quite a gruff man if you didn't know him. But once he realised you were genuinely interested, but it was so educational, just sitting listening to people like him, Dan Erickson, Harry O'Donoghue. You learn so much because you can ask questions of different breeds in the ring. You can even talk about something that you judged yourself, and you say, I really didn't know whether that was quite right. And mostly once they know that you're genuinely interested.
Yeah.
I think,
But you touch on a very valid point here, and it goes further than that. And I've said this to other people when I'm asked what advice you would give to people starting off in a breed, that it is so important that you serve your time and you learn. And I'm going off track slightly here, but I'm very hot on this. Nowadays, we see people who come into a breed and they think it's their automatic right to win. But you've got to serve your time. And one of the best ways of doing that is by, when you finish showing, go and sit at the side of the ring and listen. Ask questions from people who are in the breed for years. The amount of times you sit at Crufts and listen and pick up different opinions about quality and different opinions about various dogs, it is so important. That's how we all learn.
I actually think also looking at good dogs is a wonderful way to learn about judging.
Yeah.
I'm never a great believer when I do seminars. I tend to put up photographs of good things, not bad things, because I think it's much more important that you get into your head what a good head looks like, what a good body, what looks at. I actually often wonder, with the standards where they do put a photograph up. And in actual fact, with the British Illustrated Book of Breed Standards that's around for a long time, they do put a disclaimer in, not necessarily the best example of the breed. Quite often it isn't. Why not? Why do they not put in a fine example of the breed to illustrate the breed standard? I mean, that to me just doesn't make sense. There's plenty of very good dogs to take a photograph. No, I absolutely agree with you. And I also think it's very important talking to breeders, find out what they find is important. I mean, one of the things years ago used to bother me were wolfhound ears. And there was a big winning wolfhound dog that had dropped ears, and I said, well, they're supposed to have rose ears. How's this dog winning all these groups and best and show? But then, of course, when you talk to wolfhound people, they say, well, look, if it's a good dog, it really doesn't matter that much. It's just one of those silly things that, because if you had a boxer the other way around that had rose ears, you wouldn't show it at all. So it's just a silly like that sometimes that you pick up in breeds and what's tolerated mouth-wise and it's only when you talk to the breeders, the breed standard model is something is an awful fault, and the breeders say, no, well, we actually don't really mind about that, but we do mind about something thought of. So I think
And you know,
definitely
uh,
look and
most
learn.
uh, most people who are genuine, most genuine breeders or genuine judges will not mind people asking questions, and would be more than
No,
willing to give you advice.
absolutely. I think anyone that really, thinks that you genuinely want to know, will be only too happy to talk to you. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, don't people when they're getting the dog ready to go into the ring or just about to go
No,
into the ring,
well,
because
absolutely, yeah.
people don't like that. But generally, I think we're all only too happy to talk about our breeds.
Mm.
Uh, and I suppose there's nothing more enjoyable after you've judged either than talking to people about the dogs you've judged. And it doesn't always
Absolutely.
agreement with what you did, but it's just actually nice to have that discussion.
Yeah,
Actually,
because
the
I
other
know one of one of Rita's favorite um, uh, times was sitting at the boxer ring with your mum and just listening to her, and she picked up an awful lot of information. It is no matter how long you are in the breed, you never stop learning.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's something, as a judge, you have to accept you will make mistakes. You're not going
Hmm.
to get time. I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so obviously there's differences of opinion, but there are
Yes,
going to be that everybody gets it completely wrong. And,
yes,
the thing to do is to learn from it. And actually, I think
absolutely.
one of the worst things I've had when I've judged is when I've judged. And I expect, I'll tell you a story that your own breed, American Cockers. I was judging in Sweden years ago, and I was doing American Cockers. And the only defense I can make of myself was it was an awful ring, and they only had a mat running from corner to corner. So
Uh,
you couldn't get away from the dogs to send it down the
okay.
ring. But anyway, I did the best dog, and less than 1, 2, walked back to the table. And the minute I got to the table, I knew I'd got it wrong. The second dog should have won. And my steward goes over, comes back to the table, says, "That's a very funny woman that won." She said the second dog should have won. And I said, "She's absolutely right." The steward. And I just the rest of the day was destroyed for me because I just couldn't. I said, "What on earth did you do that for?" And it's just the most horrible feeling when you know
Mm.
immediately that you got
But I
it
think we've
wrong.
all done that.
And it's just the awful, awful, awful feeling. And I think the other experience as a judge that I absolutely hate is when a dog comes in, you think it's absolutely, again, it actually happened to me at Crops in the pastoral. There was the most beautiful white Swiss Shepherd bitch came into the
Mm.
AV. Beautiful, beautiful bitch. Seemed to be going very well initially. When I went to go over, she kept backing off me. And I tried about 6 times to go over, and I just said, "This is stupid." And she would easily have won. And I think she ended up fourth or fifth or something like that. And I went down to the lady, she was actually, I think, Danish. And she said to me, "Oh, it's the bitch you gave best in show to in Denmark." But I could have cried because I so wanted to put her up. I so loved her. And it just absolutely broke my heart that I had to put her
Yeah.
down for that. But sometimes you just have to do these things. Sorry, I interrupted a question you were going to put to me for.
But just before we move on to that, somebody's just asked, apart from your parents, who's been the biggest influence in your life and dogs?
Oh, that's a tricky one now, isn't it?
Mm.
Um, I'd have to say actually Harry O'Donoghue's been a huge influence on
Mm.
me, and learning about terriers and being on judging panels with them and so forth. I feel I've learned an awful lot from Harry. And again, in a judging context, Hans Lettinen
Mm.
um, has been fantastic. Um, in the boxer world, actually, I think probably Sheila Cartwright's been an enormous influence because she always was very honest about looking at pups and things and that sort of thing. Um, so she was a kind of huge influence as well. So I've been fairly lucky to have very knowledgeable people in my life, and also weren't above telling you when you made a mess out of things either, or that you didn't deserve to win, or they weren't behind the door were telling you if you
Yeah.
didn't either judge right or if you shouldn't have won that day or something, you know.
Yeah.
So you never got too big for you. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
No. 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 There was always somebody who would take you down.
Absolutely.
Um, Random question now. If you were to judge in any other sport, what would it be and why?
I would actually really enjoy judging dressage in the horse
Mm.
world. Years ago, I reared with horses. I rode right up until, I don't know, mid-20s, and then kind of you had to choose between working dogs and working horses. But on some occasions, I used to actually do writer for the dressage judges. They write critiques on each of the movements and they mark them for various phases in the movements. And I just think watching those horses that doing such
Mm.
wonderful motion, you may say, is just phenomenal. And I've always been an absolute ardent fan of the Spanish riding school as well. So I just love all that wonderful movement and chemistry between horse and rider. Why does a horse as powerful as that manage to be controlled by, sometimes relatively
Yeah.
small women into dancing and doing? I just think it's amazing to watch, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind judging those, but I think I need to have to learn quite a lot about that first.
Yes. Yes. Now we're going to move on to sort of a couple of serious topics, and I'm going to move your last question that I sent you up next. Um,
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts on the current situation in Holland regarding Boston Terriers and Bracky breeds, and as judges, what can we do?
Yeah, it's horrifying, isn't it?
Mm, it is.
I just feel so much for the breeders. But I looked up, a couple of dates there and of various things that had gone on. If you think in '89, the docking ban was started in Sweden. Now that I'm
Hmm.
not that or cause a problem about that,
No.
uh, but in a way, it was maybe the start of animal rights people starting to get into our world. I'm not saying docking are wrong or anything like that. I'm merely using it as a starting point. Um, in 2008, that Pedigree Exposed program,
Hmm.
and that absolutely transformed the dog world. And I think that was the start of a lot of the kennel clubs maybe doing knee-jerk reactions and trying to
Yes.
change the breed standard to appease the people. And
Yeah.
maybe that was actually the time we should have maybe started to fight back. Now, of course,
Absolutely.
there were health problems. I'm not saying they weren't, but they weren't on the scale that was like everything else. They can cleverly edit out what they want to edit out. So now we're in a situation that they're actually effectively banning 12 breeds as they
Mm.
are. And I mean, realistically, if they change them, they're not going to be the same breeds. And this is government, really. I know we tend to blame the Dutch Kennel Club, but I mean, what can they do if the government decides to ban them? They can't do anything about it. So I absolutely think it's horrific. What can we do about it? I think if, first of all, I think if the dog world would unite and present a unified front and a unified campaign against it,
Oh,
I think maybe should we look to the States? I mean, if you think of the USA, they still crop, they still dock. Again, I'm only using that as an example, not saying I want to do it. Pedigree dogs are still very much top of the list. I don't think the Labradoodles, cockadoodles, or whatever doodles you want to call them, have taken off there the way they have. I mean, certainly here, the other dog you see in the street is a doodle of some sort or another.
I, I, I,
So,
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, I have said this when I've been away judging abroad. I've said it here. And whilst I personally welcome the statement recently released from the president of the FCI, I personally don't think it goes far enough. I think, and going back to what you said, when all of this started, with pedigree dogs exposed, etc., the five main kennel clubs, i.e. FCI, the AKC, the Kennel Club London, the Australian Kennel Club, the Canadian Kennel Club, I mean, these are the big power kennel clubs, should have gotten together and formed some sort of a lobby group, committee, whatever you want to call it, to put our case forward. Because we are on the back foot now.
And these protest groups are very well financed.
Completely.
I think we need to really find a way, well, to finance a proper professional PR company to start putting the pedigree dog, and also to fund scientific research, because in reality there is no scientific proof that says that the brachycephalic breeds suffer from breathing problems more than any other. That's actually a nonsense. They're not necessarily related to each other. So
absolutely.
We need to fight it in two fronts. So one, scientifically, and lobby governments, because the thing is, already in is it Sweden, some of the Scandinavian countries, they only allow their own judges to judge the breeds.
Well, that's ridiculous.
Health reports and all the rest of it. So it's not that far-fetched that maybe one of them will start and think, well, maybe we should ban them as well. It's foolish to think that it'll stop with these 12 breeds. Not that anybody wants any of those banned. And you know, the breeders have done a wonderful job over the last few years anyway.
Absolutely. And you know, I remember, I come from a time when American cockers, you were lucky to get them past the age of 7 before they went down with cataracts. And that because the breeders took the stance that, okay, we're going to start up a program, and you know, if your dog goes down, that dog is taken out of the gene pool. And now it's rare to have cataracts within the breed. The same, Clumber Spaniels were on that list of original list of dogs with health reasons, and we all remember judging Clumber Spaniels abroad when they could hardly see where they were going. But because judges weren't putting those dogs up, the breeders decided, well, we're going to have to change something here. And the next time I judged them in Scandinavia, it was dramatic, the improvement. I think this is what we've got to get out to the world, to the governments, that, you know, we're not the enemy here. We're the ones that are protecting. And the only way that we're going to get money thrown at this is if the big kennel clubs get together and start throwing money at it.
They have to. And I mean, the thing is, the stupid thing about it is, who's policing the puppy farmers? Who's policing all these breeders that are producing these odd colours and deformed this, that, and the other thing, because they're not having to be registered by a kennel club? They can say, oh, it's a Frenchie, oh, it's a bulldog, or it's whatever. And they just bring in the reputable breeders into disrepute. I do think well, I mean, how do you ever get them all to unite? But, you know, if you think, how did the farmers escape? I mean, they punch holes in the cows' ears, they dock the lambs, they dock pigs in some countries, and nobody says anything about it. Again, I know they have reasons for doing it, so I'm not particularly criticising it, but what I'm interested to know is, how did they manage their PR that they didn't get pressure put on them to stop doing this? How did America manage their PR so that they've managed to keep cropping and docking? There must surely be lessons to be learned with how they're handling things. But definitely, I think all our kennel clubs need to start putting pressure both on governments and on well, in our case, the FCI. But it's a worldwide problem. It's not
absolutely. And it'll just take one kennel club to start promoting this idea and surely they can get some sort of unification.
Otherwise, I don't know whether it was taken seriously enough to start with. I think it was just thought of as a small group of protesters, and they just never go away because they always have to have a cause of some sort. And sometimes,
well, I do know it is slightly creeping into the States now, where there are raids on reputable breeders, and the dogs are actually taken off them, and then they have to prove that they are capable of looking after these dogs, and sometimes they don't get them back.
I know. You see, I actually think that the breeders that are registering their puppies and are showing them are basically fulfilling the getting the various health tests on something. We're all doing it, and we're being made the scapegoats actually, because it's not actually producing anything like the majority of the puppies that are on the market, and it's just very difficult to get everybody united. It should be Australia, New Zealand, Asia, the whole lot working together.
Yeah, they need to.
Some PR and some scientific body to do the research so that they can roll out actual proven facts to contradict what's been said.
Yeah.
And I think it's about the way we have it.
Because it is going to be, we are seriously under threat.
Absolutely.
And as judges, we can, and we have, taken very serious note of the health issues that these breeds have. And I think most of us are not putting up the bracky breeds that have pinched nostrils, or the bulldog that is panting as he's walking down the ring, or showing too much whatever. But that's as far as we can go.
Yeah.
We can't lobby. It's up to our kennel clubs to do that for us.
But I do think the breeders have generally taken it on board. And
yes.
I mean, I know it's away from bracky breeds, but take the skin conditions and sharp eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You rarely see a sharp eye with bad skin nowadays.
Very rarely.
Breeders have sorted that out. You won't often find pinched nostrils that are actually inhibiting the dog's breathing. The breeders have kind of learned that.
They have.
And also, we live in a society nowadays that if you sell a puppy, you're basically responsible for it from the day it leaves your premises, the day it dies, and you're liable to be sued if you sell somebody a puppy that turns out to have something genetically wrong with it. So the ordinary breeder doesn't want to end up in that situation either. So I do think everybody has tried very, very hard. But that doesn't stop the backyard breeders that don't register.
But this is the problem, and designer dogs. I mean, who thought the Cavachon was a good idea? The Cavalier, with all the problems it has, and Bichon, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster.
And how can be mating one untested dog to another untested dog prove to be healthier than it doesn't make logic, does it? But it's a generally held belief. That's the problem. So how do you get the message across to the general public that
well, perhaps our own kennel club will take up the cudgels and try and force FCI and the other kennel clubs to get together.
Yeah.
Because I think they might be listened to.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing, actually, probably for all of us, to start lobbying the kennel clubs, to start lobbying the FCI, and also try to get the rest of the world involved as well, the
Absolutely.
FCI. And to talk to the American Kennel Club, how are they finding it? And
I think that's a very valid point.
But any help in any way we can do it. But definitely, I think funds be provided to employ professionals.
And I know we're in difficult times because of COVID-19 now, but I'm sure there must be still resources there.
Yeah, and I suppose I think people feel so strongly about it now that even if a specific fund that you do feel like
Absolutely. Actually,
because
yes.
we're not spending money on entry fees and travelling and so forth.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult times and some people may not have a job, but I actually think there's such strong feeling about this around the world that they probably could raise a significant sum just by starting a fund which was guaranteed to be used for either PR or
Mm.
for scientific purposes.
Yeah.
Might be way forward.
So, final question now, and taking all of what we've just discussed to one side, um, what are your thoughts on the current situation in our sport, and how do you see it going in the future?
Mm. I I feel in some ways glad to be the age I am because I find to a degree a certain amount depressing. Um, if you think like breeds like boxers, if it was anywhere in the Midlands for CCs, it was like 250 boxers. All around the world, the entries were so much bigger as they were in Ireland, and those half the entry is now considered a very good entry. I think to a degree we're shooting ourselves in the foot in Ireland too. I think we've far too many
Mm.
shows. Um,
Yes.
what are we up to? 36 all breed shows? I might be wrong, but somewhere
Yeah, there's about, yeah.
plus group shows, plus breed shows. So, I can, and I actually hate this because I kind of grew up in this era of older people telling me it wasn't like it was in their day. So I always swore I'd never go down that road. But I suppose I'm starting to go down it a bit because, I can remember when there was only about 16 shows a year, but everybody went
Hmm.
to 16
Yeah.
shows. And the shows were all around the countryside, one being at Tyne, another being Cork, another being Limerick. They were all around the countryside, even up in Donegal they had one. Um, so everybody supported all the shows. And then, of course, you had the point system too, so it was much harder and a lengthier process to make up a champion as well. So you had to travel
Mm.
to points. Um, I think money is a big issue, obviously, with that number of shows and price of petrol and all that sort of thing. So I think that has affected us an awful lot. I mean, if you again, I'm using boxers, but I mean, at one stage in boxers, any shows around the Dublin area would have had 60, 80
Yes.
boxers, maybe. Now they're lucky if they have 20. And I
Mm.
mean, that's as a breed because I happen to know the numbers. I think to the we've lost the big kennels, which from a breeding point of view were invaluable. Probably some of them would be classed as puppy farmers now, but
Yeah,
those
that's the problem.
they produced a definite type. So if you knew you wanted, say, to improve the head or you improve the front, you could use these kennels because they bred a certain type of the breed for years. So you were nearly guaranteed that you knew that stud dog would produce um, a certain type
Mm.
for you. I think from a breeding point of view, it is important to look at what dogs produce and their pedigrees rather than the fact that they won last week and the week before, which is also another current thing. Um, I actually think the grading system to a degree destroyed the Irish show scene because I think it did away with the person who loved going out to the shows, a bit of social, maybe entered in a novice class or a postgraduate class, would win the class, but maybe never ever won a green star in their life, but were happy enough just to come and do that.
Yes.
Whereas, well, two reasons I think the new system, well, it's not new now, but that it's very hard on the non-successful person. First of all, because you have to put them in age classes. If you happen to be up at a time when somebody has a very good dog, you're going to be with it the whole way up through the class. You're never going to be
Well,
beaten.
that's a valid point.
And also, I think if you come out and you're constantly getting lower grades and no explanation, um, you're going to get disheartened and give up pretty soon. So that's going to discourage newcomers from getting into it, whereas before they could have come out and maybe won a novice, as I'm using novice class, but because the more successful people weren't in the novice class to the postgraduate class. So they could come out and maybe win a couple of classes and get to talk to people and learn a bit and maybe get a better one and then progress from that. So that's made that bit of it quite difficult too. The other thing is if you look around most of the shows and clubs, it's mostly an older generation that are organising the show and stewarding and doing the
It's
work.
a huge problem.
That it's very hard to get younger people involved in actually going to do work at shows or work at clubs and setting things up. So that's a huge problem. Actually, funny one again in Iceland, that was actually very refreshing. An awful lot of people only in their 20s are actually organising the shows and stewarding out there. So that was actually good to see that at least there's a country that has younger people coming into it. I don't know what the answer really is, and after the COVID, it will be very interesting to see. Will people have discovered a year without dog show they have a lot more money in their pocket?
Yeah, yeah.
Will they say, "Oh, I couldn't be bothered going again," or will they be delighted to get back out again? I don't think anybody can predict. But I suspect they might not have realised how much showing dogs was costing them.
Yes.
At
But I
least
also
for
think it's different, certainly from when I was growing up, where there was no PlayStation, there was no Sky TV, there was no there was no internet. So you got dragged to the shows whether you wanted to or not. And I think the
absolutely.
younger generation have so much now that they can do, and we're not doing anything to entice them in to our sport.
Exactly. What's kind of going to encourage them to come? And I suppose we're all guilty of a bit of cronyism, aren't we, at the shows? We chat with our friends and
Hmm.
you look at the newcomer. And actually, fact, I tell you, it's such a shame he's not alive today. I don't know whether you ever knew him, Colin, a boxer person called Davy Larimer.
Mm.
He was the most fantastic person. He sadly died very young at 43 years old. He was just wonderful at excluding in everybody. And of course, in those days, we used to have, our boxer picnics and our poodle picnics, and he'd be off finding the newcomer to come and join us and get to know people. And
Mm.
it's that sort of that would help get people back into it.
Yeah.
But if you have a family life too, if you're going to shows all the time and maybe your partner isn't interested, you're away weekends a lot. It is hard to see how it's ever going to get back to where it was. I think at the moment we look at it stays at a sort of plateau. The other thing I think doesn't help. There's so much legislation being brought out about breeding dogs. So
Yes.
for the hobby breeder that only wants to breed a litter when they want another show dog, it's very off-putting as well. So you'd think maybe that when the existing people start giving up showing, where are the new people going to come from? Because you really have to keep abreast with so much legislation nowadays, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. It is going to be difficult.
Um,
So
and also, the people showing dogs aren't staying in as long either. It seems to be quite often a 10-year period. They come in, they start to win, then they don't do so well. Or no, they start to judge, and then they don't do so well, and off they go.
yes,
10 years, they're gone. There's a much higher turnover of people in the dog world.
there is
Uh,
actually. There is
uh,
actually.
I don't have a solution for it. I wish I did actually, because in the scale of things, it's a very harmless sport, isn't it? And it's a great mixture of cultures, all sorts of people, all sorts of educations, professions. I mean, it's a wonderful melting pot of the world,
Mm.
really. In the
Yes, it is.
so I think by
Yes,
and
it
large,
is.
we probably more good than harm.
Okay. I think we're going to finish off there. I want to thank you very much, Anne. It's been absolutely brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you have.
I have
And I
indeed.
hope everybody out there has, because it's certainly by the comments coming in.
I'm impressed
It's
with your
been
technical
pretty,
expertise.
huh?
I'm impressed with your technical expertise.
Don't be, I'm still looking at you upside down.
Oh, right. Oh, everybody else is.
So, just for everybody else that's listening in, my intention is that next week we will have Petru Montaigne from Romania. And the following week, hopefully, we will have a joint interview with Sean and Kathy Delmar. So that will be interesting because we'll see if Sean will be able to get a word in edgeways. But on that note, Anne, thank you very much. And if you just look behind me, in your honour, I put the boxers front of,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes, in
Yeah.
your honour. Okay,
So is it
thank you very
same time?
much. All
Same
right,
time next week?
same
Same
time
time?
next week. Same time.
Oh, thanks,
Take
Scott.
care.
Good night.
Good
You
night.
too. Bye. Actually, it went without hitches, really. Huh? Oh, is that what all the text is speaking through? Oh, that's really. I thought I'd put my phone on silent. I couldn't believe why all these texts were going through. He didn't ask half the questions that he left. Not that that matters at all. But he actually, I thought he did quite well. Did you know?
And he was very good interview.
I thought so too.
That's why I said Lisa.
50 bloody texts from Lisa.
So you've got to read. I just did it with Lisa.
Yeah, I know.
And I said he was a brilliant interviewer. Very good.
No, I thought so too because I wasn't sure.
Much better than. I'm glad you asked me that question.
Oh, there she is. I wondered why my phone was burping all the time.
You're still on live. Turn off
your Oh, gee, sorry. Thank you. Oh. How do I turn it off?
It's closed down Facebook.
Oh, yeah.